Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of our Integrated Care Board. The more observant of you will probably remember there was some question about whether we should have a board meeting in April. It's slightly out of sequence, but we decided we should have, because there might be residual year-end matters to be discussed and signed off, and certainly there would be issues relating to this new financial year that we would want to consider, hence the meeting in public this afternoon. It will be relatively brief. It will end at about 3:45. There is a part 2 meeting this afternoon for voting members only, which will follow straight afterwards. So if at the end of our meeting we seem a bit rude and usher people out, that's the only reason why. By that time you'd probably be very glad to retreat from this room anyway. So that's something about the format for the day, the afternoon rather. Let me then just deal with apologies. We've had apologies from Leslie Pigton. Simon Jones, who I've seen there, Simon, is here for Leslie. We've had apologies from Andy Begley, Nitty Paul, Sean Davis, Paul Watling is here as often for Sean, Jackie Jeffrey and Simon Fogel, for whom Jan Suckling is representing. Where's Jan? There you are. Hi. And also we may be, I can't tell whether we're being joined by Lorna Gibson.
She's literally just joined.
Does that mean, Lorna, you've just joined? If you are there, hi, Lorna. Lorna is moving on to pastures new. And have you got your replacement, Joe Burrows, with you, Lorna?
Yes, she's here.
Hi, Joe. Welcome. Not easy to get to know each other, or you to get to know the board via Teams, but you're very welcome. We look forward to working with you. And thank you, Lorna, for your contribution to our work over the last, what, is it a year or so? I can't quite remember.
10 months or so. Thank you, Neil.
So. Right, let's move on then. In terms of further introductory remarks, none particularly, really, other than this is a difficult time as we try to make sure we've got a robust financial plan and a service delivery plan for the new financial year. We know the pressures we face, and therefore we have to really focus on working together to make sure that our plan is deliverable, realistic, and that's the task for the next week or two in particular, including some of the discussions I've alluded to already that will be taking place this afternoon. I also just want to pay tribute to Trevor for chairing the last meeting. Thank you very much indeed, Trevor. We're very grateful. I'm very grateful to you for doing that. I'm very, very grateful indeed. All right. So moving on. Declarations of interest. I'm not aware of any changes to the register of interest. None have been notified to me. I'm looking for Alison. Nothing that has been drawn to your attention, Alison. Great. The next issue relates to where am I? Oh, there we are. Relates to. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong agenda. Relates to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 27th of March. I wasn't there, so I can't testify to their accuracy, but are people happy that they represent a true and correct record? In terms of the action list, I've looked at those, been through them. I think the actions which are outstanding are probably covered in other parts of the agenda. But if anybody has any views about some of them not being properly highlighted, please say so now, or make sure that you raise them during the course of the discussion, the course of the meeting this afternoon. Questions from members of the public. We had 46 questions raised by one member of the public the other day, which we will do our best within our limited resources to respond to in the usual way. But apart from that, we haven't had any other questions that have come our way, my way, since the last meeting. Alison, I'm looking to you again. There are no others. Okay, thank you. So, we're now at item 34, the resident's story, when we're going to be hearing about patient experience in terms of knee surgery. And I'm looking for Stacey. Stacey, do you want to introduce this item for us?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Neil. So we've got a video resident story from a gentleman named Simon Stone-Fewins. He's a 55-year-old self-employed builder and military veteran who was referred into the Veterans Service at Robert Jones and Agnes Hunt, having had an initial knee replacement procedure outside of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. I think his story really highlights the value of having a revision hub and veterans services within Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. And certainly the difference I think the veterans service is making to the lives of servicemen and women. Within the video we'll hear how following the knee replacement, which he attributes to his time within the military, underwent an initial procedure in 2021, but then following that faced a number of challenges, including infection requiring a number of further procedures and treatments. I also think Simon's experience also illustrates quite powerfully the impact that severe knee pain can have, not just on physical health, but also on mental health, family, business, employment, etc. So, thanks, Neil.
I'm Simon Stone-Fewins, I'm 56 years of age, I'm from Hereford and I'm a building contractor. It was January of this year that I had my new knee put back in and I had the calf flap done at the same time. That was tail end of January this year. I was then discharged from Oswestry probably about mid-February I think it was, where I came under the care of my local doctor and the hospital in my vicinity. Basically we had about 4 or 5 sessions of physiotherapy, group therapy at the local hospital, trying to get as good a range of movement of what they possibly could with the leg now. We did say at the time that they thought they were going to get 90, but as of today, we still can't get 90 degrees. It's about 75, 80, which at the time the consultant here told me that was probably, you know, being a bit, I don't know what you'd say, you know, a bit advantageous to get that sort of range on the leg. So I completed the therapy there and was discharged from my local hospital. But I felt that I still could do a little bit more, but obviously they said that was as far they could take me. So I then took on some private physiotherapy with a local guy who again tried to get the range of movement, but it was still very stiff to get any further movement. So really that finished in, I guess, June, July of this year. And then I was discharged. I came back to Oswestry after that and they discharged me or as an outpatient then from, I think that was late June that I had that done. They were happy with everything. The x-rays had gone well, infection clear, so that was all still good. But with my side of things, I just felt that I wanted to get the 90 degrees if I could, but that wasn't coming. And then up until to date, we've done 6 weeks of hydrotherapy back here, which has proved quite good. It is painful when you're in the pool and they certainly put you through your paces, but that's where we're up to now at this moment in time. Yeah, being self-employed, it's been fairly difficult, to be quite honest. The initial surgery took place just over 2 years ago now. At that time, we had quite a big project on that we were doing for a small building company. But since then, obviously, the work is tending to dry up. Where I was more hands-on, I can't get the insurances, quite frankly, to get on site. I have spoke with the brokers and they've said there isn't anyone that would cover this sort of thing. So the work has dried up to an extent where we're now looking at what I can actually do. I can do a certain amount of office work, But as I say, because we're a small family business, it's a position that I was always on site with the guys that were there. I subcontract in a certain amount, but again, these guys need me on site occasionally to go through that. As it is, my wife, who was a teacher, she finished in September of this year. We made the decision, so she was full-time, so she's gone to part-time now on an open contract. So she's able to help out with the business at this moment in time. Financially, whether we'll carry on, that's something that we've got to look at for next year, to be quite honest with you, where we go with that. So there is that in the back of your mind, thinking, where do we go? It's all I've known apart from a military service, which I did before. So it's just looking and getting advice, seeking some advice, on what I would be able to do, or, are there any grants or anything like that that could be put in place just to help me at this moment in time. I can't see the business carrying on, if I'm totally honest with you, at this moment in time. So because of the situation with this, and when I reflect back to 2 years ago, even though I was in a lot of pain with the knee that I had then, before we had the first initial operation, I was still able to do the job on the site, and I was still able to drive, whereas driving now has become quite difficult. Even just walking, I expect 10 minutes would be about the max that I could do before I'd need to take a break from it. But yeah, so there has been an impact, certainly over the last 6 to 8 months, sort of thing. It's interesting, I was thinking about this earlier, how it has, and just looking, I was an active guy within work, but also sports. We used to do a lot of canoeing, a lot of walking, running, skiing was a passion of ours as a family, surfing. So anything that I could have done with 2 legs, it's a little hard now, So the rest of the family still do these sort of things, but it certainly is quite difficult when you're sat there. We're actually due away to go on a skiing holiday, but I'll be sat drinking coffee, I guess, looking out on the slopes. But yeah, it has, and it's that whole thing I think about mental illness as well, like how it affects you mentally when you're sat there, and it's only when you get those, I suppose, dark days when you just sat looking out the window thinking, I used to be able to do, or will I ever get to do that again? So try to remain positive. And I've always looked at other people, and think, well, there's a lot worse off than myself. But at the same time, it's my leg, and we've gone through this situation. I was hoping we'd be further on. Tried to be as patient as I possibly can with it, and knowing that, as the consultant has said, it could be early days, and we may have at least another year possibly in front of us that we go through this. But it's trying to remain positive about the whole situation and seeing where we can go on. But there's a lot going on, within your mind with the business as well, that side of things. So, but yeah, it has had a big impact on my life, even just to walk, as I say, should it just be just around town or helping with the shopping, this sort of thing. It does restrict you on a lot of those things. So day to day, it's a little difficult. I think that's quite a hard question, because I'm very grateful for everything that was done here. I suppose the initial thing would have been when I picked up the first infection. I was given very little information about what the procedure was, and obviously the trust that I was with was obviously trying to contact yourselves. But I think if there was anything, it would be just to be given more information just about what the procedures were. I got all of that from Oswestry, as I say. Everyone told me what was going on. Possibly prior, if you were going in for knee surgery or any sort of surgery like that, and that's not to put anyone off, but maybe if you had that information. I certainly didn't think it would impact my life as it has done. And thinking about it earlier, I suppose we all look at infections, people get chest infections and we just brush them off, but I didn't realise the severity of it and how much. I think the thing is, obviously Oswestry saved my leg and have done the best they can to this point with it. But I certainly didn't realise there were things such as the spacer which was put in, that I'd be straight-legged for 6 months, which was very difficult, those sort of things. So maybe if there was anything like that could be produced. I suppose just the follow-up from your side of things, it's hard to know, and I guess no 2 cases are the same. But this has been a 2-year period for my life, when it has changed it completely due to an infection. So I suppose that's all I would be saying, is if there was any information that could be given prior to an operation that you could say, well, look, these are the risks. Not to go into too much depth, but certainly people that have asked me that have or are due to have knee operations, you know, they've said, and I've just explained what I went through, you know, so, but yeah, maybe that would be the thing that possibly could be given out, maybe more information on that. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Stacey, do you want to add anything, draw anything out from that which we've just seen?
I think certainly Simon's stories triggered some conversations with the National Orthopaedic Alliance around how we can share some of that, because I think his point around information being more cited, and yes, there's a consent process and risk is discussed or should be discussed on an individual basis. There's a conversation that we've picked up as part of the National Orthopaedic Alliance around what we could do generically to support some of that.
Thank you. Let me throw it open. Are there other questions? Neil, mental health aspects very strongly linked there.
Thank you, and you've said it, Neil. It's that biological, psychological, social and spiritual. It's that completeness. And I think often when people come into a mental health facility, do we really concentrate on their physical well-being as well? We're getting better. But it's a two-way street. And I think we've got to think through, are we addressing the whole person or just a part of?
Thank you very much indeed. There was, yes.
As Chief Officer of Health Watch Shropshire, I just want to support what's just been said, really. I mean, time and time again, we hear from the public about their experiences of health and social care. And they're quite often, well, every single time, they're asking for more information about their particular condition, their particular situation. And so I suppose I would just encourage this meeting to consider it beyond the orthopaedic service as something that every single person would like more of. But it's also about making sure that that information is clear and accessible for everyone, and check people's understanding of that. And I completely agree from personal experience that that mental health element needs to be more closely understood, and that the staff need to be more aware of the impact that that has on people and their recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Julian.
Yeah, can I just ask a question about the MSK transformation work? Part of which I think was developing an online resource that would have more information to enable patients to make personalised decisions about operations and the risk. Because part of this is about people's the perception of risk and the reality of the risks, and actually how we inform people to make the right decision about whether they have an operation or not. And I think that was initially one of the expectations that the MSK programme was going to deliver, about those online tools. I can't quite think of the actual correct technical name for those personalised decision-making tools, but I wonder if that's something that, how we're moving forward with that with the MSK plan.
Yeah, quite successfully in Robert Jones, we implemented My Recovery digital app tool that we've advanced as we've worked through it with various of our consultants, our therapists, etc. So almost patients can get to meet, even from a pre-hab perspective, and a preparing or waiting well initiative. They can get to meet online, etc. There are various people they'll meet as part of their surgical journey. As part of the transformation, that's been rolled out across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. So that's one way where we've got access from a digital perspective into people's homes, etc., to support them with exercises, information. We're also obviously, notwithstanding from a digital exclusion perspective, looking at other ways and means as well as part of that. I think some really good work with local councils that we've just piloted around the waiting well, joint exercise sessions, information sharing, etc. So there's various streams as part of the MSK that is picking up and addressing that.
Thank you, Stacey. Roger, you wanted to come in, and Vanessa, your light is on. Does that mean you want to come in as well? Or was it Roger's? You're sharing. Roger, over to you.
Just a couple of questions. First of all, is the trend in, well, all MSK infections going up or down? post-op? And secondly, how available is that information to patients in terms of the rates and the risks? Is the information published, for example? Thank you.
Yes, there is. There's how accessible it is, but there is data published. For example, we receive every quarter our benchmark and report from a surgical site infection for orthopaedics. So that is available. Are infections on the rise? Not. The data is not suggesting that is the case. I think whereby last year we were awarded revision hub status, it's more around how do we get people, often revisions are due to infection, how do we get people to the relevant specialists quicker, rather than my experience in other trusts that I've worked in, whereby patients will undergo multiple surgeries, multiple outpatient appointments, etc., before they then get referred on to a revision specialist. So I think we can really impact with that piece of national work as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I mean, the MSK programme of work is a really important medium for standardising and improving the quality of the service which is being provided. Now, there's quite a bit of outstanding work still relating to that. It would be good to hear more from the Provider Collaborative at some point in the near future. I think the end of Q1 you set yourself some kind of objective, hadn't you, in terms of driving things forward. It'd be good to receive a progress report about that at the end of Q1, just so we can all see and all have shared with us the kind of things you've been talking about. Is that okay, Stacey?
Fine.
Harry, from the point of view of the collaborative, you okay with that as well? Good, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on then, if that's okay with everybody. Simon, Chief Executive's report.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll work on the principle that paper is as read and as included in the pack. Colleagues will see it covers 7 main areas that aren't covered elsewhere on the agenda. The first update is in terms of the reshaping of the Integrated Care Board, a statutory organisation, sets out the work we've been doing in that space, talks about where we're up to in terms of that timeline to shift the organisation to be fit for purpose, but in doing that also deliver the 30% running cost reduction that's been set out for us in terms of the actual reduction in terms of our allocation. Also talks about the office change that's taken place, so consolidated our base into the civic offices and joint with the library in Telford and Wrekin near Wellington. Grateful for the support of Telford and Wrekin Council in enabling that to happen. Really positive experience. And as of Tuesday this week, there were partners from all organisations in there doing joint work. Really great feel about that collaborative space and the collaborative work. So the opportunities there for us to think about how we work differently and manage that, and also then not use external venues, positive from that regard. I think what's really clear though, and we touch on this elsewhere, is the staff survey. There are some really clear messages in there for us as an organisation in terms of the work that we need to do and the organisational development plan that we need to put in place to respond to those challenges, which part of that will be how we work, part of that is the leadership responsibility, part of that's the clarity, part of that is the environment that we work in and the work that we're doing. So we've got a responsibility around all of that, and we need to use that staff survey feedback as the marker and the guide in terms of how we move that forward. We'll talk about the perceptions and experience of racism in the workplace, specifically around health and social care staff. And also talk about the wider results in terms of the NHS staff survey in that space. Look, let me be really clear. The report and the results in it and the information that this shares should stop all of us in terms of the detail that's in there and make us really sit up and take notice of the very real challenges that our colleagues are facing working in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. And working in health and care in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. Some of those percentages and some of the reporting and some of the challenges are really not what we would want any colleague ever to experience, and it's our collective responsibility to demonstrate the leadership and improvement in that space to move that so that individuals get a significantly better experience and aren't subject to some of the experiences that they've shared with us and talked about. Included in there, though, recognising that this was done a while ago, is an update on the work that's been taking place and the progress that's been made in terms of the NHS national reporting around this that shows the improvement between 2021 to 2023. I want to be really clear, there is still significant work for us to do in this space. And what I'd like to propose, and it builds on what we've talked about previously, Chair and Board colleagues, is use our future development session to really start to get under the skin of this in terms of agreeing and being really clear around the mandate and the leadership drive that we want to set in this space. And then how will we monitor and report that and demonstrate the progress and improvement in that so that it's visible, clear and talked about in a really honest and significant way. I pick up then in terms of the sexual safety charter.
Shall we just pause there, Simon, because there's some important issues in terms of the racism in the workforce that you've alluded to. I just want to get the mood from the meeting. Are these issues that you recognise, identify with? Given it's social care as well, David, Paul, I wondered whether you had any observations to make from a local authority point of view. The kind of behaviours that the report alludes to are abhorrent. And we've got to be able to deal with them, as Simon says. But any other reactions? Let's just turn to the local authority first.
Thank you, Chair. I guess we carry out a staff survey in Telford and Wrekin, which includes obviously health and social care, and the responses we have in front of us, as Simon's articulated, are not referenced in any way, shape or form in Telford and Wrekin in terms of our social care provision at all. I guess the element that Simon's referencing is relating to providers in terms of around that social care, domiciliary care providers and others maybe, but it's not. It just doesn't represent Telford and Wrekin in any way, shape or form. Council, that is. What I would say is, if these kind of results were driven from a staff survey I was responsible for, I would have to have an action plan that followed it within seconds. And I would say, as a board member and as a chief exec associated with this, I think it's incumbent on all of us to get an action plan in place and put this right, because it's nothing short of a disgrace, as Simon's pointed out. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, David. Louise, any thoughts about this from a SATH perspective?
I mean, similarly, we'd be extremely committed in our actions and approach to kind of improving that environment and culture going forward. So that is central to everything we're doing. I mean, inclusion and ensuring that we're treating people with respect and dignity and really valuing their individuality is absolutely critical, isn't it? Both in terms of making sure that we attend to health inequalities, but also in terms of the employment experience. Thank you very much indeed. And Meredith, you're very thoughtful about this issue, and you've got some strong views about it. What comes to your mind when you hear about this and the bit of discussion we've just had?
Thanks very much. Well, just to say, first of all, I really appreciated what Simon said. That sounded great. Absolutely the response I was hoping for, and David's comments were excellent as well. I think on a practical level, we rely very heavily on staff who come to Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and the numbers are massive in terms of the additional capacity that workforce provides. We have to protect it and treat it as precious gems, because we rely so heavily on people from different cultures, different backgrounds and so forth. So that's a practical level. On a human level, moral level, we should be ashamed of ourselves if we permit racism in any of our work settings. It's hard to find the right words. quite frankly, you know, that we could possibly allow it to continue. Work is underway, and in your report, Simon, you indicate things are improving. I wasn't absolutely sure what the work was that was driving the improvement, so I'd be interested to see more about that, and maybe the development session will provide us with that opportunity. That's great. So I think understanding cause and effect is really important, because we're looking at culture change here, and understanding what drives the improved culture enables us to focus specific attention on those areas. There was just one question. I think I saw a reference to a gap in the primary care setting around how we address racism, and I did just want to query that to understand why that gap might exist and what we were going to do about that. But overall, I very much appreciate the strong words that people are saying today. Thank you.
Given the reference to primary care, Julian, did you want to come in and say anything about this report from a primary care perspective?
The information and the perception of the staff and the relative of the staff on the ground and the amount of racism they're still encountering is quite sobering. I think there is work being done in the primary care team around staff, certainly about staff and the ethnic diversity and the support for them, and the sort of international graduates that are coming to work in Shropshire. And as has been pointed out, a lot of our workforce increasingly is coming into the county, and we need to sort of look after them and make sure that we can drive out sort of racism that these staff face. I think individual practices are aware of it, and I think most practices have a zero tolerance approach to racism towards the staff. But what that means in reality is always a challenge, because you know, how do you address it with patients, and how do you try and battle it? But I think it is something that is part of primary care, and it's part of the approach both of individual practice but also from the ICB team as well, around improving the work-life experience of people coming to our county to work for us.
Thank you. Roger wanted to come in, and then Patricia.
Just a follow-up, when will we see the action plan?
Hang on to that for a moment, Simon. Very good question, taking the words from my mouth. But let's ask Patricia for her views, contribution, and then Paul.
I think we've got a number of things to do as part of that action plan. There's one, the element around staff and staff experiences, and we had a very sad case just before Christmas relating to 2 members of staff that were in the community who were racially and physically attacked, which was unacceptable. And the reports back from our staff on a daily basis relating to racism, but also misogyny and sexism, is 70% of my staff are also female, is something of a concern, and that's reflected also within our staff surveys in terms of vulnerability and harassment. So I think there's an element of something within the work plan around also how we deliver care to people from different backgrounds. So there's that element and our understanding around that, but also in terms of how we support our staff, both in terms of tackling racism and taking action as organisations against perpetrators, and giving people the support tools and mechanisms to deal with that. I think one of the key ways is also recruiting and leaders that are reflected across the diversity, cultural backgrounds, so that people can see and understand and change the dial. But I think there's an awful lot we need to do within Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin across the EDI element of both racism, but also in terms of the reflection and language and interaction dealing with women as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry, more comments. Lynn?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Lynn.
Yeah,
Paul was first, and then you. Paul.
I'm really, really concerning to see those results from the survey, and what I would say is what's more concerning is the cultural view of that then, that when we've asked that question, that it is embedded in our workforce, that's acceptable. Well, it isn't acceptable, and certainly if we were getting figures like that on our staff survey, we would be immediately working on an action plan that would deal with that idea that is acceptable, that staff experience that kind of to that level. I think it's really, really important, especially with the amount of people from other places that are coming to Shropshire to work. We should be welcoming those people, welcoming them for helping us in this way. And it's clear that that isn't the experience of people in this sector. So we need to do something about it. We need an action plan now, I would say, rather than later on, and be working on how we deal with the culture in our organisations that allow us to say 71% of our teams can experience that without it being a problem for us as an organisation, us as a sector. It is a problem, and we need to deal with it.
And we mustn't assume that employers represented around this table have been doing nothing since this report became available or since the staff survey results were published, because I know that a lot of activity has been taking place. But I'm going to ask Simon, after Lynn, you've had the floor for a couple of moments, just to describe us how you want to bring this together, and how do you want to use the development session we've got booked for next month to have a further and in-depth discussion, not just about this, important though it is, but some of the other issues relating to the staff survey. But Lynn.
Thank you. I really welcome the conversation that's being had around the table around this issue. Ever since Healthwatch Shropshire has existed, there have been times when staff from across our system have come to us as an independent organisation to share their experiences, and some of those experiences have been around racism, which is why we recently added the information from providers about freedom to speak up guardians in each of the organisations and the ones outside of our system. The thing that I also wanted to raise was when there's a bullet point saying that 79% agreed racism between colleagues is a problem, I suppose the question that brings to my mind is how our patients, residents and carers who are also from a non-white background are experiencing care and treatment in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, because it is inevitably going to be going both ways. And so I just encourage the board to just consider that wider issue, not just the staff issue. Thank you.
Really good point, and thank you for that, Lynn. So some very strongly held views around this table. Unsurprisingly, Simon, how do you want to take this forward?
Okay, so just bring some clarity as well, because there's a risk of slight conflation perhaps. Meredith, you made a really important point about the primary care aspect of this, and at a primary care network level, and the lack of a lead or leads across the PCNs, and the lack of an action progress in the actions in terms of that specific section, which is in 2.10. What I wouldn't want people to read from that is that our statutory organisations, the ICB, providers, others, have not been working with action plans in terms of addressing this, because it made it sound, some people raised a question in terms of there was no action plan. Can I be really clear? All of our providers and the ICB are absolutely actively working on this. There is a gap in terms of the primary care network aspects, and that needs to be addressed and dealt with. That's not diluting that at all, but it's just clarity in terms of the work that's taking place. I think the second bit for me is actually one of the most sobering percentages in here was that 79% was staff on staff. So this wasn't patients towards staff. This was within our organisations in terms of that, and that's that absolutely then is our collective responsibility around how do we tackle that in a different way. In terms of the development session and what we've heard, Neil, I think one, we need to surface and bring to the surface the approaches and actions that have been put in place and that are happening. How is that getting measured? What does that look like? So I think there is an update at an organisation level. I think then there is what does this mean in terms of a system level for our workforce? So we think about the long-term workforce plan. We think about the various strands and pillars of that in terms of how do we retain our workforce, how do we attract the right individuals to come and want to have careers in health and care in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin from wherever they want to come and work with us, how do we become an attractive place to work where staff have a good experience of delivering health and care in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. And I think paramount in that is the board being really clear on its leadership role and leadership responsibility in terms of how does it want the visibility of this going forward so that it can demonstrate consistently and repeatedly that leadership and that holding to account in terms of the improvement that's expected against the background of this report that was undertaken and the results that are included in this report.
Julian?
Would it be possible to see if we can, I know it's a difficult area, but to get staff members who have lived experience of this to come and talk to the board to actually have some greater understanding about the impact, what people have experienced and what the impact has been on them, both immediate impact and perhaps long-term impact on careers even, so different aspects of
I think that's a really helpful suggestion, Julian, and definitely.
I see Gareth's light is on. Sorry? No? Okay, so look, I'm glad we have exposed this issue and begun what rightly is a robust discussion about it. I think we should look forward to a much more in-depth discussion about it at the development session at the end of May, within which there will also be discussion about the staff survey results and implications in a wider sense. And I think the idea of see if we can invite some members of staff who've had lived experience is a really good one. And being able to hear from employers from around this table about what you've actually done and what kind of benefits you perceive and what kind of shared experiences you're able to offer colleagues, that would be very helpful also. So thank you very much indeed. And back to you, Simon.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In terms of section C, important that we are transparent and clear in terms of the ICB confirming its commitment to having signed and supporting the Sexual Safety Charter and also set out the work that's taking place within underneath that to make sure that that is understood within our organisation. NHS providers have gone through that process as well, and there's work in that space already, but important that the ICB is clear in its statement as a statutory organisation of intent around its support of this and the importance of this. And thank you to Vanessa as Chief Nurse for taking the lead on this from within the ICB perspective. Updates in the report in terms of Martha's rule and explain in terms of the work taking place in there around what that means and what that looks like for providers. I provide a high-level summary of the operational planning guidance for the NHS in 24-25 that landed on the 27th of March and just highlight the main areas of focus. I'm sure colleagues will have taken time to read that in more detail, but just make that visible. As part of our responsibility as a system in NOF4, then in terms of how we are monitored against the delivery of the operational planning guidance, then we are, you'll remember at the last board meeting, the board approved the undertakings with NHS England that are being put in place. And then as we work through the undertakings and the exit criteria to move from NOF4 into NOF3, the oversight arrangements of all of that have been refreshed, and that's set out in section F. And of course, with the support of Lorna, handing over to Jo, as you introduced at the start, Chair, linked to the exit criteria, the integrated improvement plan, the frequency of meetings and the frequency of response around and responsiveness around that has been refreshed, updated and set out and is rigorous. And then final section of the report, remember that I'd updated the board previously around our response and ability in terms of the EPRR space, and that there was a review that was being undertaken. That review's been completed. There is a specific action plan that's now being implemented in partnership with NHSE. We've recently interviewed and made a temporary appointment to a senior EPRR lead who is picking up that action plan and working through its implementation, and will bring a more detailed report through to the audit committee in June, but also confirm the strengthening of the structure in this area as part of that response to make sure that we're able to discharge our statutory responsibilities. This work, of course, is about how do we respond as a Category 1 responder, how do we support the system in that space, and we need to see that playing out then in terms of the competency scores and percentages that will come back later in the year that colleagues will remember have not been good for the past 2 years.
Okay.
Happy to take questions.
Thank you
on any of that,
very
Chair.
much indeed. Roger, the audit committee has been looking at, I think you had a discussion about it at the last meeting, about EPRR. Anything you want to say in response to Simon's update?
Just to encourage the various parties to put the resource and effort into it. I think that's been the problem. And I think it's now becoming critical that we want a report by end of June that gives us a really positive steer, but thus far it's looking not great at the moment.
So turning to partners, is there any difficulty in providing the kind of information and commitments that the audit committee is seeking? Louise, are you okay with that? Okay. There's kind of muted responses there. I think the proof of the pudding will be whether or not you get that which you need for a convincing report at the end of June, which
and I think the end of June is critical, because if we leave it any later, we're going to get a bad scoring.
And if I could ask chairs to help us by keeping an eye on that through your board meetings as well, that would be hugely helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else from Simon's report that people want to raise? I can't resist this. Lorna, Joe, if you can hear me still, I know why there have to be comprehensive oversight arrangements for systems and organisations that are in, shall we say, distress. However, having looked carefully at the requirements that NHSE has placed upon us, we're, in my opinion, at risk of filling in forms and responding to your deadlines rather than actually trying to improve care, if you see what I mean. I would simply ask if there's the opportunity to review the burden that's been placed upon us, which I understand, but to relieve some of that burden, then it would help hugely, given the work that we're all trying to deliver, given that the ICB is going through management of change processes, etc. You're smiling very helpfully, so I look forward to a positive response. She's gone. All right. The next item is an important one, and there's a huge amount of work gone into both the ICB operating model and the amendments to the governance handbook. And I'm going to hand over again, I think, to Simon. Yeah. Simon's in the frame for this. Lead us through these items, please.
Okay. So I recognise that there is a lot in this, and there's a lot in the appendices in terms of the level of detail and the pack that's included. I think come back to some core principles here. When ICBs and ICSs were first established, there was an indication of a direction of travel around the 4 principles, the 4 core areas, and what that would look like. What's become clear over 12, 18 months, coming up to 2 years, that actually that's evolved and that changes, and we need to make sure that we get to the right place in terms of how do we work. Certainly then, as we got to the point of saying, how do we go through a management of change process within within NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, that actually just going through a change process without saying what's our model of operation and how do we function as an organisation, being really clear with individuals what our role is and what does that look like, then we couldn't do the management of change without having first set out what the operating model looks like. In terms of the operating model, of course, what that does is wider than just here's the operating model for the Integrated Care Board, because it talks about what this means for our system and how does this play through. In terms of the paper, I want to be really clear that the paper's written almost in two parts. The first bit, in terms of that background and context, and the role of the Integrated Care Board, the role of the Integrated Care Partnership, Neighbourhoods, Place and Systems, is taken from the national documentation on this. And I guess what I would recognise from that is that the world's moved on from when this was first published, but actually it's just there for context of when ICSs were first established, this was the language and the way that it was used and the way that it was articulated. I think as a system, we're absolutely working through and continue to work through actually what does this mean in terms of, for us, of how we operate and how we work with our two places, with our place boards, with the revised governance that we're talking about in terms of making that format right, with the development of the provider collaboration and the approach in terms of the committees in common, and how does that play its role in the system and how does that develop in terms of as it matures. So I think the other bit, the other aspect I'd land at this point, Chair, is I see this as a point in time, but it will need to continue to evolve and iterate and develop as the system matures and the various strands of that mature. However, for us as an organisation, in terms of NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, we absolutely need to be able to articulate what's our role, how do we want to work, what does this look like, and how do we play through that in a way of making sure that we can discharge our statutory duties and responsibilities whilst reducing our running costs by 30% in real terms. And so what we set out is the ICB fulfilling its four roles in terms of strategic commissioner, system convener, system assurance and system partner. How do those four roles contribute towards delivering the four goals of improving outcomes in population health and healthcare, tackling inequalities and outcomes, experience and access, enhancing productivity and value for money, and helping the NHS to support broader social and economic development, but recognising in stating that and clarifying our operating principles that we are a partner in this, and our strength here is in our partnership with our residents, partnership with our local authorities, with the voluntary community sector, with NHS partner organisations, and it's how we work and how we lead and how we behave that will set the tone in terms of that. So with our staff as well, we've revisited our work around our values and our behaviours and set that out in terms of what our expectations are in that. We recognise from the staff survey we need to put a really clear an organisational development plan in place now to say how does this become embedded and real and meaningful and people can see and recognise these as being our behaviours and our values and the expectations. But again, having something there that we can hold people to and be really clear in terms of what our expectations are sets that tone. But we recognise there is significant work to do once we've completed the management of change to then do the development work to get to the right place around how do we want to function as a system with that scale of reduction. And then, look, I think the language of commissioning almost became we shan't talk about commissioning. Actually, we've gone the opposite way on this and said we do want to talk about commissioning because we are a commissioning organisation as NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, but commissioning in the purpose of the full commissioning cycle, which is that understanding population health needs is about meeting those needs in terms of developing services and solutions jointly with our providers, with our partners, and then being really clear that we monitor and evaluate the services we put in place in terms of the impact that has on individuals that we serve. So the operating model that's in the appendix sets all that out. It talks about our direction of travel, but doesn't close down and say we've got an end point in terms of what we mean by working with our two places or working with our provider collaborative, but indicates the work that's taking place there and where that's heading. and then we refresh our governance, as we previously talked about, in terms of aligning our structures to deliver that in a way that hopefully tightens up and strengthens our ability to demonstrate delivery and the core purpose whilst discharging those statutory responsibilities. There's a lot in that, Chair, and so I will pause at that point, but hopefully that's a narrative through the document that's included in the pack.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to bring in the providers, local government reps and the voluntary and community sector to get your take on this, because although it's the ICB operating model, that means it applies to all of us around this table. But Harry, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, firstly, I think it's useful to hear from Simon that it's at a moment in time and it needs to continue to develop. I mean, clearly, the strategy system transformation group wasn't around when the provider collaborative was formed, and I just think we need to think about the relationship there. Looking at the some of the areas in the appendix 3.2.3, that's almost like the work streams for the collaborative. So we just need to make sure that we're not double counting, replicating things, and probably it may mean that we've got to revisit the terms of reference for the collaborative. But I just think we need to get on and get that sorted, otherwise we're constantly doing governance when we should be doing change. So I just think there's a bit of an urgency there. So.
Can you want to respond to that?
Yeah, no, really helpful, Harry, and had a similar conversation in Chief Execs this morning as well in terms of how do we avoid double counting and spending our time talking about governance rather than about doing and what difference are we making and what does that look like. Of course, the System Transformation Group was, and we pick up this actually because I should have covered this as well in terms of the update to the governance handbook following the review that the GGI have done with us in this space, is always recognised and is stated as being transitional so that it moves across to the provider collaborative as that matures and gets to the right place. I guess there's this transitional phase where we can't afford time doing duplicate reporting and duplicate conversations, but I think we can work together to say how do we make sense of that to get that into the right place. But that was exactly I'm looking for my Chief Exec colleagues, that was exactly the conversation we had this morning as well, to say how do we get this right.
We're not just duplicating the reporting with the non-skinny latte approach to the regional reporting structure, which is resembling more of a clinically obese approach to reporting. We're weighing the pig too much and not getting on and doing some of the doing, and that's my worry. That's a worry that's shared by chief exec colleagues around the table. There is absolutely a need to be held to account to move things on. We get that, but at the moment we could be in danger of making an industry out of writing a report and not doing anything.
Thank you. So that's helpful, Tina.
Yeah, I just liked the bit about the values in the report. I won't read them all out, people have seen them, but I think we should be supporting those values. And each organisation will have its own values, and I just wondered, is there something about having a set of common values for the ICB? Not a great big long list, but just 2 or 3 common values that we all sign up to.
Interesting suggestion. Any thoughts, Simon?
I mean, I think first of all, it was a really important process for us to go through with staff in terms of developing, stating, and getting that input to shape this. And we had a couple of really good sessions and further ongoing conversations and discussions. I think there is absolutely value, Tina, in terms of saying actually what's core to us as a system and what does it mean in terms of NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and then of course each organisation will have its own how do we respond to that and what does that look like and what makes us special as an organisation within NHS, within the integrated care system. So I'm comfortable for us to think about how we might do that in the right way without us losing sight of the importance of this for individuals in each of our organisations, because that's the really key bit in this.
Yeah, getting that balance right is important and potentially tricky, I imagine, not least of all if we think about our colleagues from local government who have different ways of operating in many respects. That's not to say you don't share the same kind of values, but whether it's possible to have a handful of shared values that act as our beacon for the way in which we do business around this table, if you like, which is, I think, what you're talking about. That would certainly be worth having a look at, it seems to me. Paul, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the place-based approaches and ship and twip. Obviously, becoming a subgroup of this board, which is positive, I think, but it doesn't, that kind of partnership, exactly in the way that you were speaking earlier, Neil, that partnership that doesn't happen when we just use one set of values, one set of language, I have to say. Multi-agency working and multi-professional working and partnership working with our communities needs us to think differently about how we express those things. And it is important that we are thinking about that language when we're talking about moving forward and the way that we can work together to identify a common language that everybody agrees with, that we move forward on. Sometimes I read the documents and these are health documents, these aren't integrated care board documents, they're not about all the partners involved, they're about all the partners in health, I'll agree, but they're not about the community that we're working for, they're not, if I shared some of the stuff that we talk about here with members of my community in the ward that I represent, they would say, what does that mean? What does it mean to me and to my community? Yeah. And I think getting it right in terms of language is really, really important. Also, I think, sort of being clear that those innovations won't happen without support, without financial support. So we need to think about that and think about how that works with TWIP and SHIP. And localised budgets would help with that, I think.
I couldn't agree with you more on that latter point. We've talked about that before, we've agreed that in principle. How that's actually delivered in the context of our current parlous financial position is, I think it's fair to say, quite a challenge, really. But it has to be the right objective, the right thing to do. Others want to come in. Dave.
Thanks, Neil. I've read the document from the perspective of coming at it from, how do we get things done? And I hate to say it, but I was left with, almost impenetrable in terms of, I don't think you can actually look at it and actually understand how do we actually get things done. So in other words, if you were to say, how am I going to use this document? And if at the end of the year, how did we do? And if we use that as a ruler to say, did we deliver effectively in the way we do? I just don't think you can do it from this document. And I'm just wondering whether at some point we sort of forget writing these types of documents and actually move into the position of actually writing how we do things. So in other words, what are the priorities of the system and how, with all of the organisations we have around the table, do those priorities get delivered through those organisations? I don't think this document really says that, to be honest.
Okay. I understand your point. My sense of it is, I'm going to ask Simon to comment. This is an important statement of what an ICS is, how an ICB functions, how the interconnecting parts are meant to join together. I'm not of a view that we keep referring to this on a regular basis and ask ourselves, is that going to help us improve UEC, for example? But if we operate as the document suggests, then it ought to help us deliver on UEC.
Yeah, it should. But the thing I get concerned about is the ICSs have been around some time now, and we're still talking aspirations, and I mean it's aspirations which are actually really, really difficult to argue against. And I think it's a question of now how does it become practical? And we talk about population health and health inequalities, etc. And we talk about them in terms of, these are the issues, we need to solve that. But actually, how are we actually going to go about doing it? I think that's the issue that I personally struggle with.
It's a very, very reasonable challenge. Thank you. Yeah. Simon, sorry, Roger, did you want to come in before Simon?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Davis says, and I think also I agree with what Paula says about this is a very NHS-orientated document. So I would ask that some thought is given around local government, local authority input to this process. I think there's a next step in all of this, and it's the engagement and communication. But I think this sets a high-level framework, and there's some very good detail in here. But what will this mean for a GP practice, or a social worker, or a community psychiatric? So whoever it may be, because it's not clear, and it's that translation of this intent into what it will actually mean in terms of how people work and the like. So that I think is needs to be worked on. I think there's no timetable around implementation of this. It's very much we want to achieve this, but when and how we monitor our achievement of the goals, it's not clear. And I think in terms of a litmus test of the effectiveness of the ICB and the ICS, we should refer to this probably about once a year or twice a year, just to see how we're getting on and have that sort of quite objective view. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Simon in, and I know others want to comment, but Simon, do you want to respond on that which you've heard thus far?
Yeah, so really helpful feedback on that. So I absolutely recognise in terms of the local authority view in terms of the place-based working, because let's be really clear on here, we need to play to our strengths as a system, and local authorities were set up originally to be place-based, and so there is no attempt here to try and say try and define the role of a local authority. It is to recognise the importance of place-based working and then saying how do we partner in that place where we play to our strengths as system with system partners. I also want us to recognise that at the point of writing this, as we go through a management of change, the Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin Integrated Care Board is NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. So it is an NHS organisation, and that on that basis there will be a language around the NHS aspect of that. However, I absolutely think we need to continue to evolve that, and as we strengthen the place-based partnerships, as the provider collaborative matures, then the language in here moves us out into a different, we need to use to move out into a different place. So I think that's genuinely really helpful feedback. I think there's also a risk that the minute you publish a document like this, that it becomes everything to everybody and everybody wants something else out of it, and we lose sight of where it's trying to get us to, because fundamentally at its core it talks about everybody's responsibility in the different stages of the commissioning cycle as the strategic commissioner for the system. And so in terms of how will the ICB, how will NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin operate as the strategic commissioner, then I think it does set out what that process is, and it also sets out where it does that with its partners, where it does that with providers, where it does that working at place, and where it will take a lead responsibility as well. Does it then say, and how does that translate into UEC or elective care or anything else in terms of a programme? No, but equally it's never intended to do that either, because we now need to make sure that we've got an approach towards an improvement methodology, that we've got a language in terms of improvement and a way of working that builds on that, that we've got our programmes well established. I absolutely agree in terms of priorities and being really clear and then saying what are we focusing on, which is has to be driven by the assessing and understanding the needs of the population, and from there then the priorities get confirmed and agreed, and then we respond to that. And that's how, you know, by my role in co-chairing the two health and wellbeing boards, and I'm looking at Rachel in the far corner, then that's part of the conversation we've been having through the health and wellbeing boards to understand those needs, to then say where do we build our priorities from and what does that look like. The tightening of the work plan that we have to deliver as a system, agree entirely. This document isn't intended to do that.
So let me just ask one or two others for their comments. Julian, if we, assuming for a moment that we approve this this document, what will you do with it?
Do you want me to answer that first before I make my other point, or
well,
what I do?
I'll leave that entirely to your discretion. If you need more time to think about the answer to my question, that's fine by me.
Yeah, I think for me, there's bits. I'll get to that point in a minute. I think for me, the couple of things that are missing a little bit, I think, are about having more prominence about primary care, and particularly general practice, in the document. I think that there needs to be more clear, primary care is a large part, and that's not just general practice, it's a large part of the healthcare system. And I think there's a lack of emphasis on that in the document. I think particularly around general practice, I do think there needs to be, perhaps, and this may just be perception from the document rather than reality, but more greater presence given to sort of general practice within the sort of executive team and the executive team sort of roles. And I think that also feeds on into the praise of general practice feeding into both the ICP and also into the provider collaborative, because I think they're missed opportunities to have primary care, general practice involved more closely within the core of the way the ICB is working in its operating model. So I may have just missed the point around what the plan's for, but I do think that's missing. And the other thing I think is missing is an emphasis around, and it has been brought up already, but about clinical and professional leadership, so not just clinicians, but other professions as well. And there's one or two mentions in it, particularly in the one with the circles and the strategy about clinical input, but I think that sort of clinical professional leadership is missing, is also being emphasised in this. What will I do with this? Well, I think the most interesting thing, is seeing the different roles and responsibilities of the different executives, so I know who to go to with which problem. That's quite useful to see. I don't think it's going to alter on a day-to-day basis what we're doing or what I think is being asked of primary care, general practice or PCN. So I do agree with what Dave says about this. It's a bit about this. Sort of set the discussion by saying that we seem to be doing a lot of talking, not a lot of delivering, and this seems to me another example of there's a lot of talking in it rather than a lot of explaining about how we're going to deliver change in a meaningful way. Maybe a little bit harsh, but I think that's probably not.
As you said, that echoes Dave's point. Any other thoughts? Patricia, how will you use this document?
Yeah, so I welcome this document as a step forward in a positive direction. I think when the Good Governance Institute came in and looked at the plethora of meetings, I think they stopped counting at 149, which was cumbersome, burdensome, not clear on how it reported in, and was hugely laborious from a staff perspective. How does this all hang together? So I think this provides some greater clarity around some of the bigger programmes of work and how we coalesce around that, and having chief execs that are leading those pieces of work in the context of system leadership, not in the context of me as the chief exec for Shropcom, is I think is important in terms of us bringing our services together. I absolutely take Julian's point around the reflection of primary care, because that is a prominent and important piece of the transformation agenda, particularly for my services around the left shift, because we can't do the left shift without primary care, and primary care can't take on more work without the support for community services, and I use that in the broadest sense in terms of mental health too. So I think this is a step in a point in time. This isn't in stone. We're an ICS that is developing and maturing, and this process of governance needs to mature with it. So I think it's a good starter for 10 that we need to go with. Otherwise, we could end up talking for months about, is it meeting A, is it meeting B, and who's in there in terms of reference, and I will spontaneously combust, I think, if that's the case.
Thank you. Meredith?
Thanks very much. Thanks, Simon. I actually think it's really helpful on an operating model basis, which is what it is. It's very clear about roles and responsibilities, which I think probably is exactly what we need today. But it probably isn't what we need tomorrow, because we need to get on with it. There's a couple of areas that concern me. One is I'm pretty sure we've been saying the same thing about the place-based arrangements for at least a year. The possibility of delegating functions once they're worked up. And it feels like there's not sufficient progress there. Now, I might not be seeing it, I totally accept that, but I would certainly say that's a major part of driving this model into motion. And that certainly be true around the role of the voluntary community sector, which we often refer to. as something we mustn't forget. But that's all we do. We don't actually deliver real action around drawing in that massive chunk of the delivery engine into all of this. So I'd definitely like to see more of that. I'm going to disagree with Paul. I think we need to see much more of health in this operating model. But I think what he means is less of healthcare, because I think the ICB's contribution into health is something we perhaps aren't pushing enough, i.e. the health of our population, not the healthcare. So I would definitely like to see more of that featuring probably through the place-based arrangements. And finally, I think I'm a little bit anxious that we've developed the ICB structures around the operating model, and we recognise the operating model is going to have to be a little bit flexible and fluid as it beds down or settles down, at which point our structure in the ICB will have been fixed, and I'm a bit anxious that we're going to fix something that isn't quite right a little bit further down the line. So I'd be interested in that point in particular.
Thank you indeed, very much indeed, Meredith and Simon. Do you want to just draw together some of these comments before I move us on?
Yeah, so look, really helpful conversation. I think we need to recognise this as this is where we are today, as we've talked about. In terms of Meredith's final point, if we were doing an organisational restructure, you wouldn't start with a transition from a CCG to an ICB, then with a evolution in terms of what the role was, and then be told there's a 30% running cost reduction, and then say, can you now make your structure fit for purpose against it in that order? Because you just wouldn't manage your change process in that way at all, would you? You'd know what your budget was, you would know what your purpose was, and then you would say, how do you get to that point? So I recognise we're running some of these concurrently in a way that in any normal change process you wouldn't manage in that way. I think the work we've done with executive leads on these areas is to say, how do we think about being fit for purpose going forwards as much as possible? How do we blur the boundaries where we need to, but how do we make really clear that we can discharge our statutory responsibilities and we understand what work happens where? And as ever, and I think this is Patricia's point, as much as what's written down, it's also about our relationships and how we work and how we do business. And that will be really key in terms of that. I think Julian's point around, his wider point around clinical and professional leadership piece is a strong one in terms of the visibility of that. I think in terms of him knowing where to go because of the list of responsibilities when he's got problems, could be balanced with, I'm also looking forward to him coming forward with some of the solutions that he's got as well, and now knowing where to take those solutions so that we can move some of that on. And I think the work that we need to do with that place-based work, with the provider collaboration on delivery, is really important in that space of how do we make a difference for residents, because I guess what I'm trying to do here at the start of the year is pull a number of documents together so that we don't spend a long amount of time talking about the governance of the system, but we talk about what are we delivering and what we're doing. However, there's a risk if you don't put the framework around it, then we end up just bouncing around through the year in terms of the conversations that take place. This provides a framework that we can come back to and say we set it in that place. I think Roger's point of maybe we come back on a 2 or 3 quarterly basis, not to try and say can we go through every dot every I and cross every T, but actually how's the commissioning cycle working, where are we up to in terms of place-based working, where are we up to in terms of the provider collaboration, how does the structure of the ICB feel in terms of its discharging its duties. Those types of questions for a board around the leadership I think are the right ones in sense.
Okay, so we're asked to agree this document, commit to it, and to acknowledge that there is a case for there being an annual review, particularly against subcommittee structures, etc. I think the message is very clear that we've got to move away from now fewer of these kind of, I suppose, philosophical descriptors about what we do, much more into how we're going to do it, what kind of outputs and outcomes that we intend to deliver. But on that basis, I take it from the meeting that you're happy to accept the recommendations within the report and acknowledge in so doing that these are steps in the right direction, for which Simon and team were grateful. Thank you. So, moving on. Oh, I'm sorry. Katrina, sorry.
Neil, just very quickly, it's a point of process. Is this model affirmed, or is it still within consultation within the ICB changes?
So within the ICB, this has been engaged on, the structure has been consulted on, and both of those processes have finished and closed down.
Okay, that's fine. It's just to, for us to approve something, but if it was still in that closing phase of consultation, would have been probably not best in practice.
And because of the nature of it, that's why the operating model was engaged on, but with a time period, and that's finished and closed.
Yeah, splendid.
Because of the management of change, that was a consultation piece, but that's also closed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Board committee reports are scheduled for information.
Chair, sorry, the governance structure piece.
Sorry, tell us what you want us to do with that.
I mean, I think I've touched on it in terms of the governance, but it's a separate paper in terms of the changes and the amendments that made and the revised terms of reference.
I thought we'd blur them
together
during discussion. I'm assuming that people are largely happy with it, bearing in mind the point that was made earlier that what we've got to strive to do is avoid any duplication.
That's fine. I just want to capture that as recommendations so that we can.
I see nods from a chief executive.
Sorry,
apologies. The discussion you've had.
Apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So the board committee report, quality and performance noted. Meredith, you happy for that to be noted?
Thank you. Yeah.
Audit and risk, Roger, happy for that to be noted. Finance committee, Trevor?
Yep, that's fine.
Remcom, happy with that as well?
Indeed.
Okay. Strategy committee, Kathy? Okay. People, culture and inclusion, Katrina, happy for that to be noted?
The content of the paper, yes, but I would also like noted that very short notice apologies resulted in some of the critical items not being taken at the meeting and having to be carried over to the next one. In particular, some of the governance reviews.
Some of the
governance reviews. So unfortunately, some of the ICB team were unable to attend on the day. So being poorly, not because of any other reason. So it's just to say that there's quite a bit of carryover, unfortunately, that will come through to June.
Thank you very much indeed. That concludes the reports from committees. Is there any other business? The next meeting is the 26th of June. Thank you very much indeed. So if I could persuade those of you who are not full voting members to withdraw, then we can continue with our part 2.